Why do you always pack so neatly? Mark's voice drifted from the living room, calm, careless. I didn't answer. The suitcase lay open on the bed, half filled with folded shirts that still smelled faintly of his cologne. My hands moved without thought, pairing socks, straightening collars. I'd done this 100 times before. Every business trip, every little escape he needed from our quiet house. He called it work. I called it habit. When I reached for the zipped pocket inside his bag, my fingers brushed against something small and stiff. For a moment, I thought it was a receipt. Then I saw it. A box, tucked neatly beneath a folded tie. A box no wife should ever find. The sight didn't shock me at first. It froze me, like the world suddenly decided to hold its breath. My fingertips trembled as I turned it over, reading the words I already knew would be there. A box of condoms. I felt my throat tighten, but no tears came. My eyes stayed fixed on the edge of that box, the faint crease where it had been opened before. He hadn't even been careful. He'd packed it himself, knowing I'd be the one to double-check. "Mark," I called, my voice even. "You want your blue tie or the striped one?" "Blue," he answered easily, without turning. I stared at the tie, then at the box. I don't know how long I stood there, listening to the quiet hum of the house, the faint clinking of dishes from the kitchen where he'd left his coffee cup unwashed again. Something in me shifted, slow, quiet, like glass cracking under a fingertip. I didn't feel rage, just a strange, cold understanding. He'd always said I was too calm, too forgiving. Maybe he mistook that for weakness. When the idea came to me, it wasn't wild or reckless. It was clean, deliberate. I took the small syringe from my drawer, the one I used for the household medicine. I filled it carefully with a clear liquid from the vial in my hand, the one no one ever noticed I kept. I replaced what he thought he could trust. Not poison. Never that. I wanted pain, not death. I wanted him to remember me with every breath that burned. I closed the box, put it back exactly as I'd found it, and zipped the bag shut. He walked in a minute later, humming faintly, his shirt half-buttoned. "Thanks, babe. You always save me from forgetting something." "Of course," I said softly, handing him the bag. "You'd lose your head if I didn't." He laughed, kissed my cheek. "You're my anchor, you know that?" I smiled faintly. "I do." He left an hour later. The sound of the car fading down the street was the quietest kind of relief. I stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the road long after he was gone. That night, the house felt different. Still, but not lonely. The silence had weight now, heavy, thoughtful. I cooked myself dinner, washed the dishes slowly, and folded laundry I didn't remember starting. Every sound was sharper. The ticking clock, the hum of the fridge, my own breathing. Around midnight, my phone rang. Unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Mrs. Walker?" The voice was hurried, clinical. "This is St. Agnes Hospital. Your husband's been admitted. We need you to come immediately." The fork slipped from my hand, clattering onto the plate. My heart didn't race. It slowed. Everything inside me went perfectly still. "What happened?" I asked, voice steady. "There's been a severe reaction," the nurse said quickly. "We're still stabilizing him." I didn't ask what kind. I didn't need to. I drove to the hospital in silence. The roads were nearly empty, streetlights flickering across the windshield. My reflection stared back at me from the glass, pale, calm, unreadable. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. When I walked through the emergency entrance, the smell of disinfectant hit me hard. Bright lights, rushing nurses, the sharp echo of wheels on tile. I told the receptionist my name, and she pointed me down the hall. I could hear his name before I saw him. Not from the nurses, but from a voice I knew too well. "Mark! Jesus, Mark!" His brother Ryan was shouting down the corridor, panic breaking through his usual composure. He was gripping the edge of a doorway, calling again and again. I turned the corner and saw him. Eyes wide, face pale under the fluorescent light. He looked up when he saw me. "Anna," he gasped. "It's bad. He's not responding." I didn't move closer. My fingers curled around the strap of my purse, knuckles pale. The noise around us blurred, voices merging into a single hum. Ryan ran a hand through his hair. They said he collapsed at the hotel. Someone called from the room. I felt a slow breath rise in my chest. The room? He nodded. They said a woman was with him. I looked past him toward the open doorway, where doctors moved around a still figure on a bed. For a long moment, I just stood there, the world narrowing to the faint rhythmic beep of a monitor. Ryan's voice broke through again, desperate. Anna, what happened to him? I met his eyes, calm, unflinching. I guess we'll find out, I said softly. He turned back toward the room, shouting his brother's name again. The sound echoed down the sterile hall, sharp and hollow. And I stood there, silent, watching everything I'd ever known unravel exactly as it was meant to. Maybe silence really is louder than revenge. If you believe that too, subscribe and stay with me, for what happens next might change how you see it. The next sound I heard was Ryan's voice again, raw, breaking. He screamed Mark's name so loud it reached through the glass, slicing through the hum of the machines. And for the first time, I finally felt nothing at all. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee. My shoes clicked softly against the white tile as I followed the nurse. Your husband was brought in about 20 minutes ago, she said, glancing at me. He's stable, but it's complicated. I just nodded. I'd learned long ago that complicated usually meant shame wrapped in polite language. The sliding doors opened, and the noise hit me. A mixture of beeping monitors, sharp voices, and hurried steps. I froze for a second, my hand tightening around my purse strap. Then I saw him, Mark, lying on a stretcher, pale and drenched in sweat, his face twisted in pain. Beside him, someone else moved. A woman. Blonde hair tangled, mascara streaked down her face. At first, I couldn't place her. Then she turned her head, and my stomach went cold. It was Claire, my sister-in-law. Anna? Her voice broke, strangled between sobs. Help me, please. I stared at her. The world around us seemed to fade, leaving only the faint hum of machines. My husband, my sister-in-law, both gasping, writhing, connected by betrayal and the same invisible thread that led back to me. A nurse rushed past with a cart, and I stepped aside. I wanted to move, to speak, to react, but I couldn't. My body felt rooted to the floor. My throat burned with the kind of silence that had saved me all my life. Mark groaned, turning his head toward me. Anna, it hurts. I met his eyes. For a moment, I almost saw the man I'd once loved, the one who used to fix the porch light, who made coffee just the way I liked it. Then I saw what he really was, someone who traded vows for thrill, trust for lies. The nurse adjusted a drip beside him. He's having an allergic reaction. We're trying to stabilize both patients. Both. The word echoed. Claire was gripping her stomach, crying out, It burns, Anna! God, it burns! I took a step closer, my voice low. You should have been more careful, Claire. Things you steal don't always fit right. Her eyes widened. What are you saying? Before I could answer, a sharp voice cut through the chaos. Anna! Mark's mother, Evelyn, pushed through the door. Her hair was messy, her lipstick uneven. What have you done? She pointed at me, trembling. They said he was fine this morning. You were with him last. I didn't flinch. He left the house perfectly healthy, Evelyn. Maybe ask your daughter why she was with him at all. She froze. The realization flickered behind her eyes, but she smothered it fast. Don't twist this. You always were jealous. You couldn't keep him happy, could you? The words landed like dull stones. I'd heard versions of that line before, from Mark, from her, even from myself in darker moments. But now, they didn't sting, they just sounded small. I didn't come here to argue, I said quietly. I came to see what choices lead to. A doctor pushed in through the doors, gloves streaked with something dark. We need family outside, he said firmly. Now. Evelyn grabbed my arm, her nails biting through my sleeve. If he dies, it's on you, she hissed. I pulled, my arm free. If he dies, It's on him. They led us out to the waiting area, all sterile white and humming lights. The clock ticked louder than it should have. Evelyn sat with her hands clasped, whispering prayers she probably hadn't said in years. I stood near the window, watching the city lights blur through the glass. Somewhere down the hall, I could still hear Claire's muffled cries. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Evelyn said softly, "He loved you once." "I know," I replied. "That's what makes this easy." The double doors swung open again. The surgeon walked in, his mask lowered, his eyes tired. Evelyn jumped to her feet. "Is he okay?" He hesitated. "We managed to stabilize both patients, but there's significant tissue damage. The infection spread fast. We had to perform a partial amputation to prevent further complications." Evelyn gasped. "What?" The room tilted slightly, not from shock, but from the weight of justice finally settling into place. The surgeon's voice softened. "He's alive. That's what matters now." Evelyn turned toward me, eyes filled with something between horror and blame. "You did this." I held her gaze. "No, Evelyn. He did." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The words died there, heavy and useless. The surgeon nodded politely and walked away. The fluorescent light overhead flickered once, buzzing faintly. For a second, I saw my reflection in the glass. Still, expressionless, almost peaceful. A smile tried to form on my lips, faint and fading like a candle under wind. It wasn't joy, it wasn't relief. It was the quiet acknowledgement that some truths don't need to be spoken. They reveal themselves. And as the hum of the hallway returned, I let that silence fill me. Steady, complete, unshakable. The officer's voice was calm, almost too calm, as he adjusted his notepad. "Mrs. Walker, I just need to confirm, you were the one who packed your husband's luggage before his trip?" I nodded. "Yes, I always do. He forgets half his things if I don't." He looked up, his expression unreadable. "And you didn't notice anything unusual in his bag?" I frowned, pretending to search my memory. "Unusual how?" Evelyn leaned forward, her voice sharp. "She knows exactly what you mean. Ask her again. She's hiding something." I didn't look at her. I just clasped my hands on the table and said quietly, "I understand this is upsetting, but I'd never hurt Mark. Whatever happened, I want to know too." The officer scribbled something down. The sound of his pen scratched through the tension in the room. Mark's brother Ryan sat beside me, tapping his foot. His voice was tight. "Look, officer, can't you just focus on that woman? Claire. She's the one who—" "Mr. Walker," the officer interrupted. "We're speaking to everyone involved. We need to understand how the tampering occurred." The word hung there like a stain no one wanted to touch. I lowered my eyes and let the silence grow. I'd practiced this in my head before they arrived. How long to wait before looking hurt. How to breathe just enough to seem fragile, not guilty. "I can't believe this," I whispered. "He's in pain, and you're asking about a box?" The officer softened slightly. "Ma'am, it's part of the investigation. The hospital's report shows traces of a chemical that shouldn't be there." Evelyn gasped, pressing her hand to her chest. "Chemical? Are you saying someone poisoned my son?" Ryan cursed under his breath. "This is insane." I looked between them, letting my voice tremble just enough. "Who would do that? And why?" Evelyn shot me a glare sharp enough to cut glass. "You tell us, Anna. You were the last one with his things." I met her eyes this time, calm, steady. "Or maybe you should ask why your daughter was with him at all." The room froze. Even the officer's pen stopped midair. Evelyn's lips parted, but no words came. Ryan turned toward her, his brow furrowing. "Wait, Claire?" Evelyn swallowed. "She was visiting a friend. She told me that herself." The officer flipped a page in his notebook. "Actually, both patients were admitted from the same hotel address. The staff confirmed they arrived together." Evelyn went pale. Ryan muttered something I couldn't catch. I watched the pieces fall exactly where I wanted them to. I sighed softly. That poor girl. She must have had no idea what she was walking into. The officer looked back at me. You seem understanding. I met his gaze. Anger doesn't heal anyone, officer. I just want the truth. He studied me for a long second before nodding. I appreciate your cooperation. Behind the polite words, I could hear what he wasn't saying. He didn't trust me, not fully, but he also didn't see proof. Not yet. After a few more questions about the luggage, about timing, about Mark's habits, the officer stood. We'll be speaking with Mrs. Claire Matthews next. Evelyn's voice cracked. She's still in the ICU. Then as soon as she's conscious, he turned to leave, and I followed him to the door, smiling faintly. If there's anything else I can do, please call me directly. I'll help however I can. He nodded, thanked me, and stepped outside. As soon as the front door closed, I walked to the corner table where my phone lay charging. I pressed the stop button. The recording icon blinked red before vanishing. Every word, Evelyn's accusations, Ryan's confusion, the officer's report, I had it all. I slipped the phone into my pocket, then turned back toward them. Evelyn was still trembling. Ryan had his head in his hands. Do you two want some tea? I asked softly. It's been a long day. Evelyn shot up from her chair. Don't play the saint, Anna. You've always had a way of twisting things. You wanted attention, and now you've got it. I tilted my head slightly. Attention? I wanted peace, Evelyn, but some families make that impossible. Her face flushed. You'll regret this. I already did, I said, for years. She stormed out, her heels striking the floor like tiny hammers. Ryan followed, muttering something about needing air. When the door slammed, the silence that followed felt almost merciful. I walked back to the table and looked at the half-empty cup of coffee the officer had left behind. His fingerprints smudged the handle. I stared at it, wondering how people like him managed to see everything and nothing at the same time. I replayed the conversation in my head, marking where my voice had trembled, where my pauses had fallen. Everything had gone according to plan, except for one small detail that still bothered me. Before leaving, the officer had turned back at the door. Mrs. Walker, he'd said, we might need to verify your statement against hotel footage. There are cameras in the hallway. If you've never been to the Lakeside Inn, you shouldn't have anything to worry about. I'd smiled politely then. But now, as I stood in my quiet living room, the words replayed sharper. Hotel footage, Lakeside Inn, a place I'd never stepped foot in, yet somehow, a place where my story might be waiting to unravel. My hand brushed against the phone in my pocket, still warm from recording. My pulse steadied. Evidence cuts both ways, I thought. You just have to know who's holding the blade. The clock ticked once. Outside, a siren passed, its sound fading like a warning swallowed by the night. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath the calm, I felt the first real flicker of fear. When the house finally went quiet, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at his desk. The air still carried his scent, clean linen and arrogance. His laptop was there, half open, the screen glowing faintly. I stared at it for a long time before touching anything. Some women would have cried, others would have screamed. I just wanted the truth, raw and complete. His password had never changed. I typed it in, and the desktop unfolded like a wound reopening. Folders everywhere. Business, travel, photos, accounts. He'd always bragged about how organized he was, how I could never handle his system. Maybe he was right. But tonight, I wasn't his wife. I was his ghost. I opened his cloud account, the one synced to his phone. It loaded slowly, each thumbnail flickering into place. The first image stopped me cold. Claire, my sister-in-law, laughing, her hair wet, wrapped in a towel. His hand was visible in the corner, holding a champagne glass. The timestamp matched one of his business trips. I scrolled further. There were dozens more. Her in his shirts, him in her studio, selfies, private dinners, the same necklace he once said he couldn't afford to buy me glinting around her throat. Each image felt like a quiet punch I didn't flinch from. I whispered to myself, You really thought I wouldn't find out? My fingers move slower now, tracing through their messages. Most of them were hidden in a folder labeled invoices. I opened one, expecting spreadsheets. Instead, there were screenshots of transfers, large sums wired from Mark's company account to Claire's art studio. 10,000 here, 15 there, each one marked with a reference: consulting, creative retainer, Clearwater development. Clearwater. That word tugged at something in me. He'd mentioned it once months ago, late at night, when he thought I was half asleep. I'd asked what it was, and he'd said, "Just a side project, nothing for you to worry about." Funny how betrayal always starts with that sentence. I clicked through another layer of files until a restricted folder appeared at the bottom of the list. The icon was gray, almost invisible, like it didn't want to be seen. The title read, Project Clearwater. It was locked with a password prompt. My first instinct was to guess the obvious. Birthdays, our wedding date, the dog's name we never got to keep. Nothing worked. I stared at the blinking cursor, feeling it mock me. Then I noticed something in the corner of the screen. A note file. Just one line inside. Always where it began. I leaned back, closing my eyes. Where it began. Our first date had been at Clearwater Lake. He'd made a joke about naming our future house after it. We never did. He named his secret instead. I typed the date of that first night, the same night he'd told me he'd never lie to me. The lock clicked open. My pulse slowed, not from fear, but from the calm that follows knowing too much. Inside the folder, there were documents, blueprints, and contracts linking his company directly to offshore accounts under Claire's name. He hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. He'd built her empire on my silence. I opened one email chain. Claire's words were cold, efficient. "Make sure Anna never finds out. She still thinks you're investing in real estate." I whispered, "You always underestimated me, Claire." The more I read, the more deliberate everything looked. The business trips, the sudden withdrawals, the missing documents I'd once been scolded for misplacing. They'd planned it all, using my trust like a tool. I clicked one video file, my hand trembling just slightly. It showed them in his office, her sitting on his desk, laughing. He kissed her forehead, murmured, "Once Clearwater's through, she'll have nothing left to claim." I closed the file. The silence afterward was deafening. I sat there, breathing in the weight of what I'd just seen. For years, I'd blamed myself for his distance, for the nights he worked late, the mornings he forgot to say goodbye. Turns out he wasn't building a life for us. He was building an escape from me. But escape has a cost. And I just found the invoice. I copied everything to my own drive, labeled it house receipts, and encrypted it under a name only I would understand. Aftermath. The room felt smaller now, crowded with the ghosts of every lie he'd told. I reached for my coffee, now cold, and stared at the dark surface. My reflection looked unfamiliar, older, sharper, awake. For a moment, I thought about deleting everything, pretending I'd never looked. It would have been easier to stay the quiet wife, the one who believed business trips were about contracts and not kisses. But that version of me was already gone. I whispered into the empty room, "You wanted secrets, Mark. Now you'll live in one." The screen dimmed as the upload finished. Then a notification blinked, one I hadn't triggered. A new email had appeared in his inbox, unread. The subject line was a single word, Clearwater. I clicked it open. The message was short. "Meeting moved to Thursday, same place. Don't forget the drive." And attached to it, a photo, taken from a hotel hallway I'd never seen before. But the reflection in the glass showed a woman's silhouette, faint and familiar. Mine. My stomach turned cold. I'd never been there, yet somehow I was part of their evidence. I stared at the image until the screen went black, my pulse steady, my mind quiet. Maybe ghosts weren't always dead. Some of us were just finally done pretending to be alive. "Are you sure you want to open this door, Anna?" That's how Michael began. His voice hadn't changed since college, steady, warm, the kind that made you trust him even when you shouldn't. He sat across from me in the small diner booth, the blinds half drawn against the afternoon light. I already did, I said. I just need to know how far the rock goes. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. All right. You always were the brave one. Brave wasn't the word I would have used. I wasn't brave. I was tired. Michael had been a private investigator for almost 10 years. We hadn't spoken in forever, not since graduation. He'd once had a crush on me, back when life still felt simple. When I called him 2 weeks ago, I could hear the surprise in his voice. But he didn't ask why. Maybe he already knew. He slid a small flash drive across the table toward me. Everything's on there. You might want to brace yourself before you look. I didn't touch it yet. Just tell me. He hesitated, stirring his coffee. Your husband's company, Walker Development, has been bleeding money for years. On paper, it looks like legitimate investments. But when you follow the trail, it leads to private accounts overseas. My stomach tightened. In his name? Some, yes, he said carefully. But most go through someone named Claire Matthews. The name landed like a slap. My sister-in-law, I said quietly. Michael nodded. I figured. There's more. I looked out the window for a moment, watching a couple argue beside their car. Their voices didn't carry, but I knew that kind of tension. You could see it in how the woman stood too still, holding every word in her throat. What else? I asked. Michael leaned in. He's been buying property under a shell company registered through her art studio. He's funneled close to $800,000 over the last 2 years, all labeled as consulting fees. I didn't react right away. Shock isn't loud, it's quiet, almost peaceful. I took a slow breath. And she knew? She had to, he said. Her signature's on most of the wire authorizations. I let that sink in. Mark and Claire, business partners, lovers, co-conspirators. The words blurred together until they became one thing. Betrayal made official. I looked at him. You found this fast. He gave a small smile. You always underestimate how sloppy liars are. They leave trails because they want to be caught, even if they don't admit it. That sounded like Mark. Always confident enough to believe I'd never look. Always assuming I'd keep cleaning up after him, smiling through the dirt. I reached for the flash drive and turned it in my hand. Did you see them together? Only photos from hotel cameras, he said quietly. Nothing you haven't already guessed? I nodded, feeling the familiar ache in my chest. Then tell me what I don't know. He hesitated again, then opened a manila envelope. This is where it gets darker. Your husband isn't just hiding money, he's covering something. Every few months there's a withdrawal of $5,000. Same day, same recipient. The transactions go back almost 3 years. Who's the recipient? I asked. He slid a photo across the table. It showed a small suburban house, white fence, toys scattered on the lawn. A woman stood in the doorway, holding a little boy. Her name's Dana Cole, he said. She used to work for one of Mark's contractors. The child, his last name is Cole, but on the birth certificate, the father's section is blank. I stared at the picture. The boy couldn't have been more than 3, maybe 4. Brown hair, round cheeks, familiar eyes. Michael spoke softly. I think he's been supporting them in secret, quietly, but consistently. My throat felt tight. You're sure? I don't bring half-truths to clients, he said. The DNA test will confirm it. But I'd bet everything I have that he's the father. The words slid into me like cold water. I thought betrayal had limits. Turns out, it just learned how to multiply. I looked down at the coffee cup between us, the surface trembling slightly with my heartbeat. He replaced me, I whispered. Not just with Claire, with her too. Michael leaned back. Anna, listen, I can take this further. I can dig into the offshore accounts, find where the rest went. But if you want my advice, don't tell anyone. Not yet. I wasn't planning to, I said. My voice didn't sound like mine anymore. It was lower, steadier, carved out of something harder. He looked at me carefully. You're not thinking of doing something stupid, are you? Stupid is trusting the wrong people for too long, I said quietly. I'm done doing that. He studied me for another long moment before nodding. You always had that look when you were about to surprise everyone. I'm not surprising anyone, I said. I'm just taking back what's mine. We sat in silence after that, the kind that doesn't need filling. When he finally stood, he placed a small card on the table. My number's on the back. If you need more proof, call me. Just be careful, all right? I nodded. Thank you, Michael. You've done more than you know. He gave a faint smile and walked out. Through the window, I watched him cross the street and disappear into traffic, swallowed by the blur of cars and noise. I sat there alone for a long while, the flash drive still in my hand. I turned it over once, twice, then slipped it into my purse like it was just another secret I'd learned to carry quietly. I whispered to myself, comment where you're watching from. Revenge stories travel further than guilt ever can. It wasn't a call to anyone. It was a truth I could finally say aloud. When I stepped out into the fading light, the city felt different, colder, sharper. And somewhere behind me, I swore I could still hear Michael's voice echoing softly in my head. There's a child, Anna, 3 years old. I didn't stop walking. I just kept my eyes forward, the world narrowing into a single steady thought. He had no idea what he'd just given me. Mrs. Cole, the nurse asked gently. I froze for a second before realizing she meant me. I'd given that name on purpose when I signed in. The waiting room smelled faintly of disinfectant and crayons. A cartoon fish swam across the wall on a fading mural. I nodded and followed her down the hall, my hands cold even though it was warm inside. When she opened the door, I saw him. A small boy sat on the hospital bed, legs swinging, a blanket with spaceships tucked around him. His hair was soft and brown, his eyes too large for his face. For a second, I couldn't move. I'd seen pictures, but this was different. This was real. He looked up and smiled. Mommy. The word hit me like a quiet explosion. I blinked, my breath catching. Hi there, I said softly, forcing a smile. I'm a friend. He tilted his head, studying me with the kind of trust only children still have. You look like Mommy. I stepped closer, my chest tightening. She must be very pretty then. He giggled. She says that about you too. For a moment, I forgot why I was there. His voice, light and fragile, pulled something from me I didn't expect. Tenderness. I sat down in the chair beside him. He had a drawing pad in his lap, filled with shaky crayon shapes. What's this? I asked. He grinned, proud. That's Daddy's boat. He said when I get better, we'll go fishing. My throat closed. Your daddy's a good man? He nodded. He brings me toys and tells funny stories, but he doesn't stay long. He says Mommy gets tired when he visits. I swallowed hard, keeping my voice steady. Do you see him a lot? Sometimes, he said, tracing a finger along one of the crayon lines. He brings Mommy flowers. She hides them so the neighbors won't see. Every word out of his mouth felt like another quiet confession, one he didn't even know he was making. I tried to focus on his laughter, not the truth bleeding through it. The door opened and a woman stepped in. Dana. She was paler than her photos, her hair tied back, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. When she saw me, she froze. Anna, she whispered, you shouldn't be here. I stood slowly. I needed to see him. Her hand tightened on the doorframe. You found out everything, didn't you? I found enough, I said. But not this. I looked back at the boy. He called me Mommy. She exhaled shakily. He gets confused sometimes. Mark. He kept pictures of you around. Said you were his friend from work. I didn't know he told Leo more than that. Leo, I repeated quietly. The name settled in my chest like a stone. How old is he? 3.5, she said. He's been sick since spring. The nurse returned, interrupting us. The doctor's ready for his update. Dana nodded, her voice breaking slightly. Thank you. I stepped back as the doctor entered, a kind-faced man in a white coat. He glanced at me politely. Family? I hesitated. You could say that. He looked at his chart. Leo's responding to treatment, but his condition's progressing faster than we hoped. We're running more tests for a possible bone marrow match. Dana's shoulders slumped. I've already been tested. I wasn't a match. He nodded. Then we'll extend the search to immediate relatives. Something in his tone made my pulse skip. Immediate relatives. My gaze shifted to Leo, who was now drawing tiny stars on the corner of his paper. He looked up at me, smiling again. Do you want to color too? The doctor glanced at me. You're pale, ma'am. Are you all right? I forced a nod. I'm fine, just tired. He turned back to Dana. If you can think of anyone connected by blood to his father, it might help. Dana looked away, her voice quiet. His father's unavailable. Unavailable? That's one word for it. The doctor frowned. Still, we'll test any possible relatives on file. Sometimes there's a close enough genetic overlap to work. You'd be surprised what turns up. He smiled faintly, unaware of the way my stomach had just turned. We'll contact you both once we have results. Then he left, leaving the room too bright, too still. Dana's eyes filled, and for the first time she didn't look defensive, just broken. I didn't plan this, she said softly. I didn't mean to fall for him. He said you didn't love him anymore. I believed him. I looked at her, the fury I'd expected never coming. Instead, there was something quieter. Pity, maybe. You thought you were saving him, I said. But men like Mark don't need saving. They need mirrors. She wiped her eyes. He hasn't called since the accident. Maybe guilt finally learned how to speak, I said. Leo looked up again, oblivious. Mommy, can we go home soon? Dana swallowed. Soon, baby. We just have to wait for the doctor. He turned to me. Will you come too? I crouched down beside him, my voice barely a whisper. I don't think so, sweetheart. But I'll be thinking of you. He frowned, confused. Daddy says people who love me always come back. I felt something tighten in my chest, a small ache that had nothing to do with revenge. Then maybe I will. Dana looked at me like she wanted to speak, but no words came. I stood, adjusting my coat. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and something sweet, like the scent that used to cling to Mark's shirts after he came home late. As I reached for the door, the doctor appeared again, a clipboard in hand. Excuse me, he said, looking at me with quiet hesitation. Mrs. Walker? I froze. He smiled gently. I ran Leo's preliminary blood panel alongside yours from the visitor record. I hope you don't mind. It's just a protocol thing when relatives visit. Your markers... He paused. They're a near-perfect match for compatibility. The world tilted slightly. What does that mean? He nodded toward the room. It means you could save his life. The words echoed in my mind long after I left, steady and cruel, like a promise I never asked to make. Anna, you're looking radiant, Greg said as I stepped into the conference room. His smile was polished, practiced. It didn't reach his eyes. The others around the long table turned slightly, pretending to be busy with their papers. I'd been in enough rooms like this to know when a decision had already been made before I arrived. Thank you, I said calmly, taking the empty seat at the head of the table, the one that used to belong to Mark. The silence that followed confirmed exactly what I wanted to know. They hadn't expected me to sit there. Greg cleared his throat. We appreciate you joining us today. I know things have been difficult. Difficult? I repeated softly. Losing a husband to scandal, learning he left behind half a dozen lies, and discovering your board of directors suddenly can't make eye contact. I'd call that educational. A few men shifted uncomfortably. Greg chuckled lightly, the way people do when they want to control a facilitate's room. Of course, but we're here to help you, Anna. We want to protect the company. I folded my hands, watching him. From what, exactly? He exchanged a glance with the woman to his right, the accountant, nervous, young, clearly out of her depth. Walker Development needs stability, he said. The press has already caught wind of the embezzlement. Investors are pulling back. We thought it might be best if you signed temporary control over to the board until things settle down. There it was. The coup, dressed in courtesy. I leaned back in the chair. Temporary control, I repeated. How generous. It's just business, he said. That's what Mark used to say before he emptied the accounts. My tone was even, but the words landed like small, deliberate cuts. You worked with him for years, didn't you, Greg? Must have been exhausting pretending you didn't notice. His jaw tightened. You're angry, and that's understandable. But this isn't personal. Everything about this is personal, I said. He built this company with my father's money. You think I'd let it burn quietly? The room went still. I hadn't planned to mention my father, but the moment it left my mouth, the power shifted. The younger executives looked up from their papers, suddenly curious. Greg tried to keep control. Your father was an investor, yes, but that doesn't change the fact that, I cut him off, that this company's cash flow is still tied to 3 offshore accounts under your oversight? Don't look so surprised. I did my homework. The color drained from his face. I could feel the weight of the room shifting again, air thick with unspoken panic. You're making accusations you don't understand, he said tightly. I smiled faintly. Then help me understand. Explain why the same subsidiary that handled the Clearwater funds was registered under your niece's name. He opened his mouth, closed it, then looked toward the accountant as if she could save him. She couldn't. She was already typing something on her laptop, probably verifying what I'd just said. I leaned forward. I'm not here to sign anything. I'm here to clean up what's mine. You want stability? Then start acting like you have something worth saving. One of the older men finally spoke, voice quiet but respectful. Mrs. Walker, what exactly are you proposing? Effective immediately, I'll be assuming temporary oversight of all financial operations until the audit concludes. Every transaction over $10,000 will require dual authorization. Mine and yours, Mr. Patel. I turned to the older man. You're the only one in this room who's never taken a bonus off the books. I checked. He blinked in surprise, then nodded slowly. That seems fair. Greg laughed under his breath. You can't just walk in here and take charge. Can't I? I said softly. The bylaws say otherwise. As the majority spouse and trustee of the Walker estate, I have interim authority until an executive vote is called. You sent me the paperwork yourself last month, remember? He looked down, realizing his mistake. The very email meant to push me out now gave me the leverage to stay in. I stood, smoothing my sleeve. This meeting is adjourned. And Greg, next time you plan a coup, don't send the invitation to the target. He tried to recover his composure, muttering something about lawyers, but I was already walking toward the door. The quiet behind me was thick, heavy with realization. Outside the boardroom, I stopped for a moment, letting the adrenaline settle. The hallway smelled faintly of cologne and printer ink. Mark's world, sterile and expensive. For the first time, it felt like it belonged to me. I heard voices from behind the door, low and hurried. I didn't mean to listen, but one sentence slipped through, carried by Greg's whisper. If she finds out what really happened to her father, we're finished. My breath caught. Another voice, female, unfamiliar, whispered back, she won't. That file was sealed after the accident. Accident. The word clanged through me, too sharp, too wrong. My father's death had always been a mystery wrapped in polite explanations. A car crash on a wet road, no foul play, no investigation. Just condolences and silence. Now, the silence sounded like guilt. I turned slowly, my reflection catching in the glass wall beside me. For years I'd been the quiet one, the compliant wife, the woman who kept her pain tidy. But in that reflection, I saw someone different, someone awake. If my father's name was tied to this company, then everything Mark had built, every lie, every deal, was built on the ashes of something much older. and I intended to uncover it piece by piece. "You don't want to see this, Anna." That's what Michael said as he handed me the envelope. His voice had that careful edge people use when they already know you'll open it anyway. I waited until I was alone. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind that makes every sound feel like a secret. I sat at the kitchen counter, the one Mark insisted we buy imported, and pulled the papers out one by one. The first page was a death report. My father's name stared back at me in black ink. Robert Hayes. Cause of death. Workplace collapse. Site Walker development 5 years ago. My fingers tightened around the edge. I whispered his name under my breath, half to keep myself from shaking. My father had worked construction his whole life. When I was little, he'd come home covered in dust and say, "If a man's hands aren't dirty, he didn't work hard enough." I'd believed him. I believed everything he said, especially the part where he promised he'd retire soon, that he'd build my mother her dream porch. I'd been told he died in a highway accident. A truck blew a tire, they said. Instant. No pain. My mother believed it until the day she followed him. 2 months later, alone in a hospital bed. I thought grief took her. But now, looking at the signature at the bottom of that report, I saw the name of the company that signed off on the death settlement. Walker Development, my husband's company. A strange calm came over me, the kind that feels like standing at the edge of a cliff, wind pressing against your face. I turned to the next document, a transfer form. The compensation money, $180,000, had been rerouted. Recipient, Clearwater Consulting. Clearwater. The name from the hidden folder. The final page was an email thread. A familiar signature closed it. Mark Walker. The message was short. "We'll process the claim quietly. No need for her to know. It's cleaner that way." Her. My mother. I stared at those words until the letters blurred. Then I folded the papers neatly, as if tidiness could stop the tremor in my hands. I thought back to that night, the night my mother's car spun off the bridge. She'd been driving home from the insurance office, angry after another rejection. They said she had no proof her husband's death was tied to his job. She told me on the phone, "Someone's lying, Anna." I told her to come home, that we'd talk in the morning. She never made it home. I used to blame the rain. Now I wasn't so sure. When I heard the door open, I slid the papers back into the envelope and tucked it behind the stack of old cookbooks. Mark walked in, smelling faintly of whiskey and cologne. He looked tired, but not in the way people look when they've worked too hard. It was the tiredness of someone carrying too many lies. "Didn't expect you to be up," he said, dropping his keys in the bowl. "Couldn't sleep," I said. He poured himself another drink. "You're still thinking about the company, aren't you?" "I told you, I'll handle it." I watched him swirl the glass. "You handle a lot of things, don't you?" He glanced at me, amused. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Just an observation," I said softly. "You've always been good at keeping things quiet." He chuckled. "That's how business works." "No," I said, my voice low. "That's how people disappear." He frowned, but I smiled faintly, pretending it was nothing. He didn't press further. He never did. He believed in his control over me like it was law. Later that night, I watched him from the doorway. He'd taken his pills, painkillers he claimed were for back pain, though I suspected they numbed something far older. The glass was still half full on the nightstand. He muttered in his sleep sometimes, and I'd learned to listen. Truth spills easiest in dreams. At first, it was nonsense, broken words, pieces of sentences. Then, clear as breath, he said her name. Lydia, my mother's name. I froze. He turned slightly, his voice heavy and slurred. "Didn't mean for it to happen. She wasn't supposed to be there." I stepped closer, heart pounding, every muscle tight. "What did you do, Mark?" I whispered. He murmured again, words tangled with sleep. "She found the report, said she'd tell. It was raining. I followed. She wouldn't stop." His hand twitched against the sheets. "I had to." The air left my lungs. I stood there, staring at the man I'd once promised to love, the man whose lies built my whole life. He shifted again, mumbling something about insurance and Clearwater, then fell silent. I stayed there for a long time, my hands shaking at my sides, until the quiet became unbearable. I turned and walked out, closing the door gently behind me. In the hallway, the shadows felt heavier. My mother's voice echoed in my head like a memory I'd buried too deep. Someone's lying, Anna. Now I knew who. I went to the kitchen, opened the drawer, and pulled out the envelope again. The papers felt heavier than before, as if they carried every truth I'd ignored. I laid them flat on the counter, tracing my father's signature with my fingertip. He died building something that was never meant for us. My mother died chasing the truth. And me, I was left standing in their wreckage, holding the proof both of them were right. Behind the door, Mark murmured again, her name softer this time, almost tender. Lydia. The sound turned my stomach. I whispered to myself, steady and cold, "You shouldn't have said her name." Because now I wasn't just the wife he betrayed. I was the daughter of the woman he destroyed. And he'd just handed me the reason to end him, one careful move at a time. "Anna, you need to sit down." That's what Michael said the moment I opened the door. His face looked older than I remembered, lined with the kind of exhaustion only truth can bring. He held a folder under his arm, the same way he used to carry case briefs in college when we pulled all-nighters. I didn't sit. I just crossed my arms and waited. He sighed. "You were right about Clearwater. It wasn't a consulting firm. It was a shell created months before your father's death. And the money trail, it's ugly." My throat felt dry. "How ugly?" He opened the folder and slid a few pages across the table. "This account," he said, tapping one with his finger, "received all the insurance and settlement funds tied to the site accident. Within days, that money was transferred into Walker Development's offshore holdings. Someone needed a clean front. That's where you came in." I stared at the papers, trying to absorb what he was saying, but the words blurred. "You're telling me he married me to cover a crime?" Michael nodded slowly. "It wasn't just business, Anna. It was strategy. You were the daughter of the man he killed." The room tilted slightly. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. For a second, all I could hear was my heartbeat. Slow, heavy, deliberate. "He used me," I said quietly. Michael's voice softened. "I don't think he planned for you to find out. Men like him never believe their wives will outsmart them." I almost laughed, but the sound caught in my throat. "He always said he loved how calm I was, said it made me predictable." Michael met my eyes. He underestimated calm. For a long moment, I didn't speak. I looked at the documents again, the numbers, the signatures, the lies dressed up as transactions. My father's death wasn't an accident. My mother's grief wasn't weakness. And my marriage wasn't love. "What happens if this gets out?" I asked. "He loses everything," Michael said simply. "The company, the assets, maybe even his freedom. But you have to be careful. If you push too fast, he'll destroy evidence." I nodded, though my mind was already moving ahead of his words. "Then I'll make him believe I still trust him." Michael frowned. "Anna, I'm not reckless," I said quietly. "Just done pretending." He studied me for a moment, then closed the folder. "There's something else. I ran a check on the Clearwater project logs. The day your father died, Mark's signature appears twice. Once for site authorization, and again for post-incident disposal. That's not standard procedure." I felt something tighten in my chest. "Disposal of what?" "Evidence," he said. "Or witnesses." A silence fell between us that felt too heavy for words. I looked toward the window, where the late afternoon light cut through the blinds in thin golden lines. Dust floated in the air, like the past refusing to settle. "Michael," I said softly, "why are you helping me?" He smiled faintly. "You once helped me. You lent me your notes when I was failing contracts law. I guess I never forgot what integrity looked like." I wanted to thank him, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I asked the question that had been burning at the edge of my mind. "Do you think I should forgive him?" He looked at me for a long time before answering. "That depends. Do you want peace? or justice? I closed my eyes. I want both. Later that night, I sat alone in Mark's office. The house was silent except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. His desk still smelled faintly of his cologne and whiskey. Papers were stacked neatly, as if order could erase guilt. I turned on his computer, using the password I'd guessed weeks ago. Our wedding date. It still worked. I opened the folder labeled Projects, then scrolled through until I saw it. Clearwater. The same folder that haunted every corner of this story. Inside were reports, invoices, and one hidden subfolder titled Audio Archive. My pulse quickened. I clicked it open. There were dozens of files, most named after dates. I picked one at random. The recording crackled to life. Voices echoed, faintly through static. Mark's voice came first, calm, businesslike. "We can't delay the worksite cleanup. It needs to look accidental." Then another man. "What about Hayes? He's refusing to leave until the scaffolding's cleared." Mark again, quieter this time. "Then we proceed anyway." The sound of wind, metal creaking, a faint crash, then silence. I pressed pause, my breath frozen somewhere between disbelief and horror. I replayed it just to be sure I hadn't imagined it. But no, the voice was clear, steady, deliberate. The same voice that used to tell me he loved me before leaving for late meetings. The same voice that whispered, "Trust me," when I questioned missing money. He'd said it so casually. "Then we proceed anyway." My father's life had ended in that sentence. I sat there for a long time, listening to the faint hum of the computer. My hands trembled, but not from shock. It was something colder, determination. When you've been lied to long enough, truth doesn't bring relief. It brings clarity, and clarity is far more dangerous. I whispered to myself, "He thought I'd never find this." A reflection flickered in the dark monitor. My own eyes looked back at me, calm and unblinking. For the first time, I understood what real power felt like. Not rage, not vengeance, but control. I saved the file to a separate drive and locked it away. My next move would decide everything. If you were in my place, would you forgive or finish it? "Sit down, Anna," she said. Voice clipped, eyes sharp as glass. The way she perched at the edge of the couch reminded me of every dinner where she'd corrected my posture or my opinions. Only this time, she wasn't in control. I sat anyway, placing the envelope on the coffee table between us. "You always liked order," I said quietly. "So I thought we'd start with facts." Her lips pressed thin. "What are you playing at?" "Nothing," I said. "Just showing you what your son forgot to hide." I slid the photos and documents across the table: bank transfers, false invoices, the Clearwater payments, and the ledger from the company's offshore accounts. Her hand twitched before she reached for the papers. She scanned the pages, her expression stiffening with each line. "You shouldn't have these." "I shouldn't need them," I said. "But your son killed my father and built his empire with blood money. Then you helped him bury it." Her eyes flicked up to mine, cold and measured. "You're making dangerous accusations." "Not accusations, proof." I leaned back, calm but deliberate. "Every dollar you received after the so-called settlement went through your personal account first. You signed those transfers, Mrs. Walker." Her hand froze on the page. "You think you can threaten me?" "I don't think," I said softly. "I know. The SEC will think so too." The silence that followed was long enough to hear the grandfather. Clock ticking in the hallway. She set the papers down carefully, as though handling something toxic. "What do you want?" "Your signature," I said. "On this?" I pulled another document from my purse, a notarized transfer of power for company oversight. "You'll endorse my control until the audit ends. You'll attend the next board meeting and support my decisions publicly. And you'll do it smiling." Her voice sharpened. "That's extortion." "It's balance," I replied. "You've spent years calling it loyalty. I'm just adjusting the definition." She laughed then, a short, brittle sound that cracked under its own weight. "You think you can scare me, girl?" I met her gaze. "No, but fear's already in the room." I just named it. She looked away first, eyes tracing the edge of the curtain like she could hide inside her composure. For a woman who'd spent decades pretending to be untouchable, her silence said more than words ever could. Finally, she exhaled. You'd ruin your husband? Your family? Family, I repeated softly. You mean the people who lied to me, stole from me, and used my father's death to fund their comfort? That family? Her eyes darted back to mine, searching for something, weakness, regret, anything. I gave her nothing. You won't walk away clean, she said. I stopped wanting clean, I replied. I just want true. Her hand trembled as she reached for the pen. She hesitated once, twice, then signed. The sound of ink scratching across paper was almost musical. I watched her name bleed into the page, Margaret Walker, and felt the air shift. Power changed rooms quietly, but you could always feel it when it happened. When she set the pen down, I said, You'll announce it yourself. I'll prepare your speech. Her mouth opened, but I cut her off. If you don't, I'll release these files. The SEC won't care about your age or your excuses. You'll lose your name before he loses his freedom. Her glare hardened, but I saw the tremor behind it. You're just like him, she said bitterly. Cold, calculating. No, I said. I learned from him. There's a difference. I stood, gathering the papers, but left one photograph on the table. A younger version of my father shaking hands with a man in a Walker development vest. You knew, I said quietly. You knew the night it happened. Her silence was confession enough. I turned toward the door. Her voice followed me, low and trembling. You think this will save you? I paused. I don't need saving, just closure. Outside, the air was thick with the faint scent of rain. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Michael. I answered without stopping. It's done, he said. What is? The filings, divorce petition, and SEC report went through together, time-stamped and sealed. Once they open one, the other follows automatically. I slowed my pace, a strange calm settling over me. You're sure? Positive. By the time he realizes it'll be public record. For a moment, I didn't say anything. Then I whispered, Good. Michael hesitated. Anna, are you ready for what comes next? I looked at the dark sky, clouds folding over each other like bruises. No, I said, but that's never stopped me before. He sighed softly. You're stronger than you think. Not stronger, I said, just done being silent. When I hung up, the rain finally started. It fell slow and heavy, washing the air clean, leaving behind that faint metallic smell that always reminded me of endings and beginnings. Inside the house, I knew she'd be sitting there alone, staring at her signature and wondering when everything slipped out of her hands. And somewhere else, Mark would soon read his name on two documents at once, one ending a marriage, the other exposing a crime. Sometimes revenge doesn't need noise. It just needs timing. I stepped off the porch and into the rain, letting it soak through my coat. For the first time in years, the weight I carried didn't feel like punishment. It felt like truth. Anna, you can't be serious, one of the board members said as I walked into the conference room. His tie was crooked, his voice shaking. Around the table, faces shifted uneasily. Men who had smiled at me for years without ever seeing me. I placed a folder at the head of the table and said calmly, I'm very serious, Mr. Lang. You all should be too. Mark sat across from me, looking confident in that smug, practiced way of his. This is an emergency session, Anna. You can't just... I can, I said, cutting him off, and I already did. The bylaws grant temporary oversight to the acting vice chair in the event of conflict of interest concerns. He smirked. And what conflict would that be? I opened the folder and slid the first document toward him. The one where the CEO of Walker Development authorized false accounts under Clearwater Holdings, funneled money through multiple fronts, and laundered compensation payouts meant for worker deaths, including my father's. The room fell silent. Papers rustled softly as the men leaned forward. I could feel every heartbeat in that space. Mark laughed quietly, leaning back in his chair. You've lost your mind. This is This is absurd. No, I said, steady and even. This is documented. I lifted the next set of files. Audit reports, signed transfers, digital correspondence. You might recognize your own initials. His jaw tightened. You think you can humiliate me? I smiled faintly. I don't need to. You did that yourself. He slammed his hand on the table, but no one met his eyes. They were all watching me now, waiting. I could almost hear their loyalty cracking. I looked around the room. Gentlemen, I suggest you read what's in front of you. This company has been bleeding through fabricated contracts for years. The funds never reached the victims' families. They went here. I tapped the Clearwater logo on the printed page to an account signed by both Mark Walker and Margaret Walker. Someone at the end of the table muttered, My God. Another began whispering to his assistant. Mark's face was turning pale. You have no right to disclose internal documents, he hissed. I have every right, I said quietly. As of yesterday, I am the controlling signatory for company oversight. His mother's trembling signature flashed in my mind. The deal had worked. I leaned forward, voice calm but cold. This isn't personal revenge, Mark. It's public accountability. You built your empire on lies, and now those lies have invoices, dates, and signatures. He rose from his seat, eyes wild. You can't do this to me, Anna. I already did, I said. He reached for the documents, but one of the board members stopped him. You should sit down, Mark. This doesn't look good. Mark stared at him, disbelief flooding his face. You're taking her side? No, I said, gathering the papers. They're taking the side of truth, something you never learned to respect. A cold silence settled over the table. I could feel it, the shift, the unraveling. Everything he built now stood on a fault line he created himself. Effective immediately, I continued, Walker Development will be submitting full disclosure to federal investigators and the SEC. Legal counsel is already prepared to cooperate. He looked like he might faint. You'd ruin me over this? I met his eyes. You ruined yourself when you let my father die for profit. One of the board members cleared his throat. Mrs. Walker, perhaps we should vote. Mark's voice cracked. Vote? You're all vultures. I turned to him, lowering my voice to a whisper that still carried through the room. You called me predictable, but you never asked what happens when the quiet one learns how to bite. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His confidence, that armor he wore so easily, was gone. He looked smaller, almost lost. The vote took less than 5 minutes. Unanimous. He was suspended pending investigation. The gavel's tap echoed like a door closing forever. When it ended, I stood and gathered my things. The flash of cameras through the glass walls signaled the press waiting in the lobby. Someone must have leaked the meeting time. Maybe Michael, maybe me. It didn't matter. The world was about to know. Mark turned to me one last time, his voice hoarse. You think this makes you clean? I met his gaze evenly. No, it makes me free. I walked out first, the door clicking shut behind me. The noise outside was instant. Reporters shouting, cameras flashing, questions tumbling through the air like hail. Mrs. Walker, is it true? Did your husband embezzle funds? Are you filing for divorce? I said nothing, just kept walking. The sound of my heels echoed through the marble lobby, steady and sure. Behind me, I heard the elevator doors open. Mark stepped out, pale, sweat shining on his forehead. He was trying to speak, but his words slurred. Someone gasped. He stumbled forward, clutching his stomach, then his throat. For a moment, the cameras froze. Then chaos erupted. I turned just enough to see him collapse, the papers in his hands scattering across the floor like broken promises. The paramedics pushed through the crowd. I stayed still, calm, watching the flashes light his fallen figure. He'd always said poison wasn't his style. I guess he never imagined mine. I whispered to myself, quiet enough for only me to hear. You shouldn't have said her name. The air outside was cold when I stepped through the doors. For the first time in years, I felt it fill my lungs without resistance. Sometimes justice doesn't shout. Sometimes it just breathes. I didn't mean for it to happen, he whispered. voice shaking like loose glass. The hospital room was too white, too clean for the kind of mess he'd made of his life. Machines hummed beside him, tracking a pulse that refused to quit. I stood near the window, arms crossed, watching the city lights blur against the glass. He tried to move, but only his head shifted weakly toward me. Anna, please. I didn't know it would go that far. I turned slowly. His face looked thinner, drained of that confident color he used to wear like armor. The tubes around him twitched with every breath. You didn't know? I asked softly. You ordered the scaffolding cleared. You signed off on the payout. You buried my father under paperwork. His eyes filled with tears. It was an accident. You have to believe me. I walked closer, setting my bag on the chair beside him. You always were good at accidents, weren't you? My father's death, my mother's grief, my marriage. He flinched like I'd struck him. Anna, please. I can't move. The doctors, they said the damage is permanent. I tilted my head slightly. So this is what helpless feels like, I murmured. He stared at me, searching for mercy that wasn't there. You're my wife, he said, voice trembling. You promised to stand by me. I did, I said, until I found out what I was standing beside. He tried to reach for my hand, but his arm refused to obey. The effort made him groan. I'm begging you, he whispered. Don't let them take everything. I'll sign whatever you want, just don't leave me like this. I leaned closer, my voice calm, steady. You already left me years ago, Mark. You just forgot to tell me. He started to cry then. Real tears. Not the polished ones he used to manipulate boardrooms and dinner guests. His face crumpled as if the weight of it all had finally landed. I can fix this, he said between shallow breaths. We can say, it was all my mother's doing. She knew everything. I'll give you names, accounts, anything. I slipped my phone from my bag and placed it gently on the table beside him. That's good, I said. You should tell me everything. He looked confused. Why? So I can help you, I said with a small practiced smile. He nodded weakly, desperate for that small illusion of care. The Clearwater Fund, he said slowly, wasn't just money. It was leverage. Your father found out about the toxic waste dumping. He threatened to go public. I panicked. The site wasn't safe. We cut corners, saved millions. But when the accident happened, your father wouldn't sign off on the report. My stomach turned, but my expression didn't change. So you paid him off? He shook his head. No, I paid the foreman to delay the cleanup. He wasn't supposed to die, Anna. I swear, it was just supposed to scare him. I felt the blood leave my hands, but I stayed still. The phone's screen glowed faintly, recording every word. He took a ragged breath. Your mother's death. It wasn't me. She knew. After your father died, she came to the house. She said she was going to the police. I told my mother to handle it. I didn't know she'd drive her off the road. I swear, I didn't. My throat tightened, but I forced the words out. You let me think it was grief, that she just couldn't live without him. He closed his eyes, voice breaking. I didn't know what else to do. Everything was falling apart. I loved you. I still do. I looked down at him, this man who once thought he could rewrite truth with charm. Love, I said quietly, isn't supposed to come with body counts. He sobbed harder, the sound raw and uneven. I deserve this. Just, please don't hate me. I watched him for a long moment. The pity he wanted, I couldn't give. What I felt wasn't hate. It was something quieter, something final. I reached out, brushed a tear from his cheek, and said softly, Rest, Mark. You've confessed enough for tonight. He blinked up at me, confused. Confessed? Before he could finish, there was a knock on the door. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside, followed by a man in a gray suit. Michael. Mrs. Walker, one officer said. We have a warrant for the arrest of Mark Walker on charges of corporate fraud, obstruction, and conspiracy to commit manslaughter. Mark's eyes widened, darting between them and me. Anna, what did you do? I met his gaze evenly. I stopped waiting for you to tell the truth. Michael handed over the paperwork. Signed by the district attorney, he said. Effective immediately. Mark started to protest, but the officers were already reading him his rights. The cords around his wrist trembled as his hand tried to move. He couldn't. His voice cracked in half. You planned this, he whispered. I prepared, I said, quietly. You taught me that. The officer stepped aside, waiting for the nurse to disconnect the monitors. I turned toward the window again, watching the lights outside blur into motion. Behind me, his voice came one last time, broken, fading. Anna, please, forgive me. I closed my eyes. Forgiveness, I said, was never the point. As they read him the final line of the warrant, I slipped the phone back into my bag, the confession still recording. Some truths don't need closure, they just need witnesses. The judge's gavel hit once, sharp and final. The sound felt like air breaking. Mark sat slumped in his wheelchair beside his attorney, eyes hollow, face drained of the arrogance that once filled rooms. I stood across from him, steady, my palms resting on the table. His lawyer started talking fast, but the judge cut him off. The evidence is overwhelming. The court recognizes Mrs. Anna Walker as the rightful beneficiary and controlling party of all assets under Walker Development. I didn't move. I just watched Mark's mouth open, then close. The color left his face completely. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, we'd also like to enter into record the testimony of Miss Rachel Evans. The name made my stomach tighten. The door opened and she walked in. The mistress, dressed in beige, hands trembling, eyes darting everywhere but mine. She took the oath, voice cracking on the first word. He told me the payments were from a charity account, she whispered. He said his wife didn't need to know. Mark's head snapped toward her. Rachel, don't. She flinched. I have a son, she said. You told me you'd protect him. Her voice broke completely then. The kind of truth that doesn't need proof. The room went silent. The judge nodded once, heavy with finality. This court finds Mr. Walker guilty of fraud, perjury, and obstruction of justice. Sentencing will follow. Mark looked at me like a drowning man watching the shore disappear. Anna, please, he whispered. I didn't answer. Forgiveness was not part of my vocabulary anymore. When the judge adjourned, flashes exploded from every direction. Cameras, questions, voices, none of it felt real. I kept walking, my heels steady on the marble. Then the prosecutor's voice rose above the chaos. Mrs. Walker, one question. Who was the unknown donor covering the child's hospital bills? I stopped mid-step. Every sound seemed to fade. My fingers tightened around my purse as I turned slowly toward him. Some debts, I said softly, are paid in silence. The ward was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt earned. Machines breathed softly around small lives, their rhythms steady, fragile, beautiful. I stood at the doorway for a long moment before stepping inside. Leo was asleep, his tiny chest rising and falling beneath the pale hospital blanket. He looked peaceful, untouched by everything that had happened. The nurse smiled faintly when she saw me. You're the donor? I nodded. Yes, just here to sign the paperwork. My voice sounded calm, but inside, I felt something deep loosen, something I'd carried too long. She handed me the forms. Anonymous adoption, long-term care, educational trust. Every box that once carried Mark's name now carried mine, unsigned, unseen. I took the pen and wrote carefully, each stroke a quiet goodbye to the woman who once begged for kindness from a man who never understood it. When it was done, the nurse said softly, He's lucky. Not many people step forward for kids like him. I smiled a little. Maybe he reminds me of someone who deserved better. She left me alone with him. I pulled the chair close and watched the gentle rise and fall of his breathing. Somewhere outside this room, reporters still tore apart what was left of Mark's empire. Every building, every contract, every lie. It all came down faster than anyone expected. His name was already fading from headlines. His legacy nothing but dust on paper. I reached out and brushed a strand of hair from Leo's forehead. "You'll never know," I whispered, my voice almost breaking. "But I was the storm that saved you." For a moment he stirred in his sleep, as if the words found him somewhere deep inside. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it exhales. And if you listen closely, you'll hear it whisper. Subscribe for more stories where justice whispers, not shouts.